This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables.
Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
Hey there, welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Danse Macabre, and Wythe Marschall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Throughout the show, Chris and Wythe hope to amplify new creative voices. We'll chat with different TTRPG designers, focusing on the world of indie games.
We take a curious approach to game design, working through a range of mechanical and narrative questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games just so powerful.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
Hey, we're live.
All right.
How's it going, Chris?
Doing well. How are you, Wythe?
I'm all right. Just shipping some books. Speaking of RPGs, the joys of making RPGs.
Yeah, the joys of indie RPG publishing.
Yeah, moving your own product. And it is hot. It is July in New York City when we're recording.
We gotta make sure we're hydrated while we're recording.
There's gonna be so many water sips.
Yeah, that's okay though. I think we gotta stay alive. Yeah, exactly. Can't just write games. You can't live on games alone.
Oh, I really wish you could, in a metaphorical way. But yeah, so do you want to kick off? Do you want to tell listeners, who you are and what brings you to Why We Roll and what Why We Roll is to you? And
yeah, sounds great to me. I'm Chris Pickett. I am a multidisciplinary artist. Mainly I do tattoo work, but also illustration and games writing. I've been writing games for the last with any real effort in the last 2 years or so. It's something that I've been passionate about since I was, I think, 12 or 13 is when I first picked up 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons at my local GameStop. For the last 25, 26 years have been pretty consistently playing role-playing games more than anything else. Played a bunch of different versions of the Dragon game, played, Pathfinder, bunch of indie stuff. It just kind of eventually led to a point where it was this is something that I care about. This is something that I make time for every week. Why not write my own game? And I think as somebody who is, as an artist, as somebody who's studied art, spent a lot of time investing in that, I'm also interested in the craft of it more so than I think, most players or GMs that I've kind of interacted with over the years. I'm always interested in how mechanics and story and lore building and all of that interact to create, I think a really complex and really beautiful piece of art. The game that I'm working on right now, I've got a few things kind of back burner, but the one that I've been working on the most concentratedly lately is a game that I'm calling Danse Macabre. Danse Macabre. I don't speak French, which makes the setting for my game a little dubious. But yeah, it's a semi-historical, I guess, low fantasy game, taking some of my favorite aspects of the fantasy genre. It's meant to be really grim. It's meant to be really dark, but also rooted in real world history at the same time, real political economy. Yeah, and also just meditating on life and death in I guess, European medieval society. The game itself, it's the fantasy elements are that death has abandoned the world after, centuries of war, after the pestilence, the Great Plague, has kind of wiped through most of the world population. For reasons unknown, I leave it up to the player and the GM to kind of decide this, but for reasons unknown, death has just vanished from the world. When you die, you are immediately kind of reborn in the same body, but you come back with strange corruptions that kind of lead to a generative experience while you're playing the game. It's the same character, but it's a little bit different every time you come back. And yeah, I mean, for me, it comes out of a love of OSR stuff. It comes out of a love of high lethality games, but also wanting to have some kind of like continuum or continuation for the characters.
Yeah, that's dope. I mean, I think, like we've talked about leading up to this show. I mean, I think we have a lot in common in terms of moving from the Dragon game to playing a wide variety of games to really becoming obsessed with the craft and like how you make these things and what about the narrative design or the big ideas of the world are fun to play with, like mechanically. And how to get people to actually have fun. I mean, what about them are truly fun experiences for your friends and then strangers ultimately, as opposed to just like interesting mind games to read. So I mean, I definitely share a lot of that. So that's what the podcast is about. Yeah, so my name's Wythe Marschall, and I'm a writer, and I make games, and currently created a game company called the Stillfleet Studio when I decided to publish a game kind of for real, but definitely as an indie project still, called Stillfleet, which is a sci-fi game, which is very much political, and that's kind of the focus of our game practice, is to make games that are, number one, really, really fun and very high quality, but also sort of do some sort of leftist political education and really challenge a lot of the things about the Dragon game that are not just like frankly annoying or like old holdovers, but like consternating from a design standpoint, like the kind of colonialist, like just go kill quote unquote monsters, like everything that's an other, kill it, take its gold, and then go back to, Waterdeep or whatever. But it's because, I mean, for one, that gets old, I think, especially for me as I aged and was no longer like a little boy who wanted to like kill things. Which I never really wanted to kill things, but it also, I think it's just like a really limiting design space. So you can make games about all kinds of stuff. And I actually really like action movies and spy movies and all that stuff. So, I mean, my games are, my sci-fi is still pretty full of danger and stakes, but it's sort of always political in the way in real life, like people don't wander alone in the wastes. That's just, it's never really happened from a history standpoint. Even as far as I understand, big history all the way back to like the Neolithic or Paleolithic, people didn't wander alone. I mean, you would have died alone. So, I like to make games about people in groups, and I like to set them in the future because those are things I think a lot about. I write about the future of food otherwise. So all my games are not really about food. They are kind of about the role of technology and like basically socialism versus capitalism. What kind of world do we want to live in? How do we interact with the environment? And I think environmentality is something, I've talked about a lot. Another reason to have a design podcast was like, oh, there's so much to do thinking about the diegetic world and world building. And then how do you make cool rules for games? So I love, like with Danse Macabre, that you have the world built in such a specific, interesting way that feels both kind of more serious or hard and less kind of fantastic, and everyone's like a wizard. But it still has a lot of the fantasy tropes that are really fun. It still has a lot of just TTRPG stuff. So sort of mutation, basically dynamic, this dynamic, super fun. Very different from what I was working on in the sense of the way I've kind of pitched Stillfleet and what it's grown into, but actually pretty similar to my original love of like games from D&D to Pathfinder to like really the OSR, and creating games that were just sort of a D20 game of my own design from the beginning, set in sort of apocalyptic, far, far future Earth, where there's all kinds of, everyone is basically a mutant. And so there's sort of no background normal humanity, right? Everyone is an unhuman. So, I think, again, that it'll be interesting to come at this podcast from our perspectives and to build on these games, and also mention other games that we're interested in, because I know we have other ideas but beyond those two, which we're sort of trying to get into the world. So that's the short version of me. And nice. I think, hopefully people would be interested in this podcast. There are other game design podcasts, I think, but I liked, for me, when I thought about it as like, this is car talk, right? This is like really into the nitty gritty, but still very informal. So not like didactic, like you have to read theory to enjoy the podcast. So
right. Well, and I think, one of the interesting things that we've talked about leading up to it, and one of the things that I'm most excited about is, especially as like a relatively new designer and just thinking about the hurdles that go into all of this. And, something that we've talked about is outside of mechanical design, there's also graphic design, there's layout design, there's all of these other things that you may not necessarily be familiar with, but it is an integral part of designing a TTRPG. Like that just basic level of legibility is so very important. Like, how do you get the information across? How do you get people to read it and remain engaged with it? I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that. I'm excited to hear what other designers have to say about that as well. And then, just thinking about like the challenges of implementing different mechanics of trying to like weave lore into the game itself. I think that every game presents its own challenges in how you do that, how you want to communicate things. And, I'm very excited to see what other people have to say about that as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think in addition to, there's kind of like game design from a narrative and mechanical standpoint, which is I think often what we think of when we're talking about TTRPG game design.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's, as you're saying, graphic design, art direction, which are tightly linked. Typesetting is a specific aspect of graphic design.
Yeah.
And then you get into like the business design, like how do you like create a TTRPG that goes out into the world and what channels? And there's so many good ways now. Like if you're not as focused on that and you're just like, I'm going to publish something cool that people can find. I mean, itch.io is pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah.
You can also get on DTRPG, which, Roll20 owns DTRPG, and they're the biggest sort of marketplace for games. And many people find games there. I don't, but I mean, our games are there. You can buy them. And, there's plenty of awesome Discords. Like we have a Discord server and we're part of, so many others where people really have awesome, interesting conversations just all the time. It's like endless, really kind of fun, deep conversations about game design. So, I mean, there's plenty of like free tools to start, but I think it'll be interesting to think about like that aspect too. Like why game design, like toward what end? Is it an art practice, a hobby? And at what point is it like, oh, this is taking all my time. I need it to like make money. I need it to pay for the books at least, like book printing, not very lucrative, like very costly thing. It's a high value, low margin business. So we can definitely get into that as well. I think in addition to the graphics and the look and feel, and of course the core, what makes the game fun piece.
Yeah. It's not surprising that a few publishing houses, kind of hold a lot of power in the space, whether it's TTR, I mean, just book publishing in general, it's hard. It's hard to do. And like you said, it's not very lucrative and requires a lot of lift, a lot of labor.
Yeah. I mean, the amortization of IP is this thing that it's really just a metonym for this bigger thing in capital where it concentrates. Like the example that jumps to mind is in 40 Rock. The company making microwaves buys NBC. And so it's like NBC's whole point is to like sell microwaves. Like it has it isn't about like, is SNL funny? It's just like, do we sell microwaves? And that's kind of how I think like you could say like when the guys who made Magic bought TSR and then their in turn bought, right? It's like the Disneyfication of everything where literally Disney might end up, one day buying Hasbro, who knows? But basically you have giant companies that are like, we need to sell Marvel crap, right? We need to sell whatever stuff that actually makes money, which really is somehow tied to like selling cars, some other deal. It has nothing to do with games, right? And it filters down to like, well, we own all these other properties, all these brands.
Right.
For the game designer, it's not a brand. It's your passionate thing. It's so fun that you spend all this time on and you hang out with your friends and try to make really enjoyable and share deep experiences. It's like making art. It's like making a play. Or writing a novel more than, running a company in that sense. So I definitely think it's interesting that games provide such a crystal clear example of this bigger thing in capitalism where, the power and wealth concentrates at the top and these very few hands who do not care about art or deep experiences or challenges to these systems. They're not interested in that. So I mean, I don't think right now is particularly like, a good time to make games in any sense economically, but I also don't think it's like there's been that much, or, it's like, what do you expect? This is just like capitalism. And I don't think it's a bad time in that sense either. It's like, well, there's plenty of people play games. People love this stuff. There's a lot of new people discovering TTRPGs specifically, which is awesome. So
yeah, absolutely.
we can get into all that stuff, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, this is stuff we haven't talked about as much. I feel like you and I have talked a lot about like specific game things we find fun, but you know, I am curious what your thoughts are on because you've also tried to make like a war game with someone, and you know, you've had some practice in this world too. So
for sure.
These will be episodes, I guess.
Well, let's save it for save it for an episode. But I think talking about the market economy of even just putting a game out is super interesting. I mean, you know, from my experience, board game stuff that's more materials heavy or component heavy, that's a whole can of worms. Like you have to have so much volume in order for that to be economically feasible in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, you know, I would be curious. I have some friends that are indie board game designers. I'd be curious to get them on the show to talk about this too, because there is overlap, I think, between the different types of publishing. Yeah, totally. I mean, I really prefer TTRPGs for a variety of reasons that I can articulate, but not in a like, it's not like I think objectively they're better. It's like I prefer them for X, Y, and Z reasons. And this show I think will concentrate in that space because that's where you and I have spent more time recently writing and creating. But you know, we also play board games, and we're designing a board game based on Stillfleet that is it's at a different level diegetically. So it's about middle management as opposed to sort of the void miner out doing the murder hoboing. But it is ultimately, and you know, it's card based, so it'll all be cards, different kinds of different cards set up in a play area. But that's definitely something I'd love to talk about because it's very much a draft, you know, in process kind of game. So it's sort of playable and it's sort of like doesn't make any sense yet. But so we'll have on different folks. That's the sweet spot, man. Good stuff. Well, you know, speaking of Stillfleet, let's talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about Stillfleet. I mean, you know, we got brief intro at the top. But, you know, I would love to hear more about like what the kernel of Stillfleet was, like where, you know, outside of just having played games and being like, oh, this is something that I want to do. Like, you know, do you think that there's an identifiable moment where you were like, oh, I have this universe that I want to put out? Because I think one of the cool things about, well, one of the many, many, many cool things about Stillfleet is just how thoughtful the kind of background, the lore building, the setting itself is. Can you kind of speak to how that came to be?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. I mean, it came to be like, I think a lot of big long-term whatever projects, especially kind of artistic projects over years unconsciously while consciously playing games and trying to do certain things like one at a time. But the totality, it's one of those like cloud droplet distinction problems. Like when did all of those things become Stillfleet specifically versus, well, Wythe runs a lot of like OSR games set in a very specific setting. He's like built up in his head, but in a way that I feel like I really vibe, and I always mention this kind of early on with like the work of not just M. John Harrison, who wrote the Viraconium books, but writers like that who kind of satirize the urge toward like nerd culture and who also do it very politically and very, very elegantly. So the prose level is without parallel. I mean, it's just some of the best writing. I think Le Guin, similarly, you know, raised by famous anthropologists, kind of trained as an anthropologist, is satirizing anthropology and satirizing aspects of left politics while still ostensibly like kind of a socially aware leftist herself, right? And definitely a feminist and all that. So I think those writers like always have stuck with me. And when I think about my own world building, like I get really into it because that's fun, but I see that like some of the job is to make fun of that and allow players to like do their own world building and kind of meet them halfway. So anyway, that's all said. While I was like creating all my own specific things, I'm sure my brain was also just working on like, man, some of these things are just not that fun. Like D20 games to me, played them since I was 12. I think I'm a little older than you guys started with 2E. Yeah, it's just like, I'm not digging, like I've played them I've run 5E relatively recently, for basically as a request. I mean, I wouldn't normally play it. I think there's a lot better games out there, but yeah, it was kind of a dissatisfaction. It was like both my own world feeling like really full of things and specific ideas, and you get enough of those and there's the droplets become a cloud. And then very specifically that OSR move of just like rejecting stuff I didn't like about sort of the received, okay, we all play D&D version of TTRPG culture, to the point where I eventually rejected the D20 itself. And that was the most freeing thing. So I would say it became Stillfleet specifically as opposed to a very similar game, but with kind of OSR-ish rules, when I just was like, okay, we're going to use all the dice and your scores will be different die types. And that'll be fun, I think. And we played it like once and it was really fun. And I was like, this is great. Like I've hit on the head the thing I wanted to do. after years of trying different stuff, I mean, I'm not saying, but it's like iteratively found a thing that I think is interesting. I haven't seen anyone else do. Now other games have come out since this is, 2016 is kind of when it crystallized. And then with the world building, it was similar. It's like, so I'd been thinking about, I think constantly about climate and biotechnologies, especially. So sort of biopunk was something I was really obsessed with, like the writing of Paolo Bacigalupi and Octavia Butler, especially, are kind of often highlighted. But there's a lot of good writers. There's a lot of interesting stuff. And still, while that vein of like fears about synthetic biology 2.0 have kind of quieted in the last decade, it's still sort of filtered in a culture where people are aware that, like, for example, biocomputing, like DNA is actually really efficient for storing information. And so future computers might be, like, I read a good sci-fi leftist book about the New York commune, like 50 years from now when New York has become communist. And they have all their server farms are algae based. So they're like algae in the ocean doing the analytics for a planned economy on the East Coast. Yeah, it's really cool. And the description, like the main scientist who's working on it is like, yeah, we don't really know what they're doing. Like, it's very much a black box where, like, we use, like, they do certain computational tasks for us that would be really hard given, like, climate disruption and energy grid crises for us to do on land. But we know they're doing a lot of other things. Like, we think of it as, like, dreaming or communicating, but, like, he's like, I don't want to be part of the new religion that's sprung up around the algae, but, some people go there. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff, like, I was really sort of obsessed with, like, all right, well, there's very much nightmarish dystopias around both harder tech and kind of biotech, for sure. Like, a lot of biopunk was straight up Luddite. I mean, it was just like, this is all bad. But you also have threads, even in Dawn, and I mean, you have threads throughout that are like hopeful and like think that kind of that's just how it'll have to go. Like, climate will wash away some of the petro hard tech because it won't make any energetic sense in a very basic, big picture global capitalist system. It won't work to make hard stuff the way we do. So you'll end up with like this goopy future. So my games were set in this goopy future. The OSR happened, and I was just really into this idea of trying out new mechanics. Found a mechanic I really liked, and I think that version still lacked the thing that we ended up naming the whole system, the engine that we've built all these games around, which is the grit mechanic. So burning a pool of grit and simplifying everything to that. So everything just costs grit, but having hundreds of power options, and the grit mechanics can get really weird. So like most things are pretty simple, burn 3 or 4 grit or whatever. And you can always boost 3, 6, or 9 grit, add those to a roll. You want to get a high number, like most games. And that's pretty intuitive. Players seem to pick up on it. And the whole mechanic of like, you have a limited pool. It doesn't all come back automatically when you sleep. So you have to really think through, how fast am I going to regain grit? That all makes sense. That came a little later. So I'd say that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle when the setting became also distilled and moved away from Earth. So just kind of going in the hard SF direction of like, you're on an abandoned alien space station, was really just a complete like fiat design choice of like simplifying what I would call the narrative structure, so that players feel like they know what to do from the jump. So players and GMs, there's an evil company, they have this space station, it has all these time space gates, they can go anywhere in the universe. You can go back to Earth, they're from Earth, you can go anywhere you want. But the fact that you're in a sort of smaller space and there's all these sort of portals, but they're mostly unexplored, they're dangerous, whatever. It's all kind of MacGuffinized on purpose and just kind of echoes of other SF. It seemed to help players, because when it was set on Terra for years, which is where it mostly was, it was like post-apocalyptic Earth could be anything, and it was so big and vast. And I still have that's still a major setting for the game, but there wasn't any defined narrative structure. It wasn't like the one evil company you work for. So I guess that was the last piece. So I would say it actually became really Stillfleet, maybe 2016, but it was when it was like defined as a game about you are complicit working for sort of early middle capitalist, industrializing company that has access. It's found the treasure trove, right? It's found these gates called Stiffworks that can go to other planets safely. And they're all synced in time just for complete MacGuffin science reasons, so that you can come back and thousands of years haven't passed, So you go back and forth and you do trade, and the company wants to do trade in a very kind of unequal, unethical way. And you are meant to, as the player, freak out at that and subvert that and eventually kind of fight the company in some way. But it's not, that stuff is all, not written out in the book too much, because people take that in many different directions. And some people just want to fight space goblins, and that's fine. And some people it's very slow burn and more theatrical character development and more kind of everyone's a bad guy kind of paranoid setting, like Spire, which is a similar game that came out by a more famous writer right after I'd already kind of developed this. So It was an interesting process, and that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope you get the sense it's like there was no one moment, but I think definitely the narrative structure of the venture for the company was the like defining, now it's one kind of game that's specific.
Yeah, no, I think that does make sense. I mean, that's something that I really appreciate and enjoy about the game. Something that I constantly feel, I guess, just exhausted by whenever I'm running a game is like, how do these people know each other? Like, how, like what's the point of even getting this specific group of people together? And for years, running fantasy games for me, it was like, all right, I'm just going to do the tavern thing. You're all in a tavern, and a fight breaks out, and what do you all do individually? And then like you had this kind of like way of shoehorning people into a narrative structure. And it's just like after years of doing that, I was always just like, this is so dumb. Like I feel dumb doing this to my players. I don't like it when a game master or whatever does that when I'm playing as a player character either. So it feels arbitrary. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that there is this kind of quick start way to jump into something where it's like, this is the reason you're here. Whether or not you agree with it, that's besides the point. You're here. This is your job. That's what we're doing. And I think there's also something that's deeply identifiable with that as a worker in late stage capitalism, where it's like, you don't have a choice. This is the system that you're in. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. You got to play the game. Doesn't feel good, but you have to do it.
Yeah.
And at least in Stillfleet, there are these more kind of open opportunities to rebel against that or to actually resist that system, which is nice.
Yeah, because it has to still be fun. So like the games that,
Right.
the murder hoboing that's happening before, it was reversing the valence. Instead of my friends murder hoboing and me as the GM shoehorning in like a political cause that then they were like, oh, that's cool. We'll help, this sort of well-meaning, socialist nascent state of posthumans and try to stop this kind of corrupt, conspiracy of the sort of Burkers, the sort of new industrial types. Instead of that being the thing that I had to bring and that they had to like agree to, and it was still then could be really vague and take different directions, which is fine. It was super, super fun, but it was more fun to me to just say from the beginning, okay, here you're in this political situation, but then it kind of can very often devolve toward murder hoboing / kind of you're trapped in space, typical SF shenanigans in an RPG. And I think that was like a very natural way to just take the things I wanted to do and I found the most fun and make them really apparent for people, but still fun. So it didn't feel like I had to do anything at that point to make the players, like it wasn't as linear. I didn't have to direct them. They all just immediately got it. Like the first play test when I called it Stillfleet was in Boston, and my friends were like, from literally the first session, we're like, well, we're going to have our own company that's like more moral, and we'll call it the Virtuous Company. And it was like mind blowing because I hadn't told them that much. I mean, it's pretty simple pitch. It was like, okay, it's a space company. It's weirdly kind of early modern because like they found this gate, so they're in this advanced station. Like they don't really know how nanotech stuff works. They're still like trying to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But people got it right away. And I think since then I've noticed the same patterns of like, I don't have to push too much. And that's fun for me because I don't want to be in the position of, I think it has to be a little different than political organizing as such, right? It's games. It should be fun, first of all, or else it isn't really a game in a meaningful sense.
Right.
It could still be like functionally a game in some philosophical sense, but it would be sort of subordinated to another reason. But the reason to do it is to have fun with your friends. So I like being able to provide a sandbox that feels relevant to folks and they know what to do without having a lot of like literature they have to read. It's just like a zany setting, go have fun. And I think it's similar to other settings, I guess, that I experienced. Like I remember Numenera came out and it was around the same time again. I was like developing my specific world. And at the time I really thought, I actually for a while we played Numenera, but we didn't like the mechanic at all. I love Monty Cook's writing. I love the world building, but the mechanic never really worked for me. And then the setting itself was just, again, it was so open. It's like, well, what is the point of this? So everything is kind of, technology is so futuristic, it's magical, but there was no thing driving, like you said, like, why are we adventuring? Like, what are we doing? What are my players supposed to do? So, again, I think we'll see more games like that. I think there's a reason, like I don't think it's an accident that games like Spire, I think a lot about some of the good Apocalypse World games that have come out. There was a quiet one that really was a nice book called Tremulous that was basically a Lovecraftian horror SF Apocalypse Engine game. It's a little book, really nice, and kind of assumed like the early kind of Call of Cthulhu vibes, that it would be sort of like one and done, you guys are fucked, kind of situation. Cartel is a really good game, another Apocalypse World game.
Cartel's cool, yeah.
Cartel's
really cool.
I think those kind of things where the setting, it's not that this, like, Cartel does have a hyper specific setting, and that like you're in Durango or whatever. And Stillfleet does start with a hyper specific, like it's a specific alien space station that's very weird, but they're all kind of MacGuffinized to me the right way. And Spire too, right? Like it's a very specific, beautiful image of this dark elf, light elf city, right? With the whales that can fly and that bring this sort of cargo. But like at the same time, it's left mostly open and you could just leave. And so it sort of provides a very specific starting place for you to then go elsewhere. Whereas I feel like the move when I was a kid was really big games had to be sort of a whole world, and the game company couldn't tell you too much what to do. And I think that was actually kind of a weird misstep in terms of like how people actually like to experience games. They kind of want to be told something pretty specific in my experience, at least to get started. And then they hack it, they take it apart, they do the opposite. But
no, I mean, I think I would agree with you. I think it is a misstep. And, I think, Spire, of course, Stillfleet, since we're talking about that, even maybe like Blades in the Dark, it has a way of front loading the politics of the game. And I think that does a lot for the general flavor. It's like in a lot of a lot of Dragon games I've played, a lot of other like fantasy stuff where it is that other, I guess, kind of design philosophy where it's like, well, we have this big detailed world, but like just figure it out from there. It's the politics are always so vanilla, and they're not really that thought out in any significant way that affects the player characters. So, it's kind of like, what else do you do other than murder hobo? Because you're essentially in a world with no political ramifications for what you're doing, and thus no moral or ethical ramifications for what you're doing as well. So yeah, I don't know. I appreciate a game that just puts it out there right in the floor and says, this is the political system that you're in, this is your role in it, and then lets you kind of figure out and be generative through play from there.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk next week with your game. It's a similar question of like, well, what does it mean to be a hero in a world that's screwed up, where the structure of the world, has these problems? And I think it's really a question. It's kind of the difference between like network TV and prestige TV, IRL in 2023. It's like, do we think generally being a cop makes you a hero automatically, or is it more heroic to like think about pushing back against really corrupt structures of power? So I think obviously because I remember being a little kid and being really torn in that way, where it's like I both wanted to be a hero, but I saw the appeal of being a chaos goblin, right? Just like being a min-maxed, just crazy character in like Planescape and just doing whatever random stuff. Yeah, and it was fun. But I also over time got kind of tired of that, and I could see my friends and I could see people with different levels of kind of kid ADD stuff. They would get variously into it or out of it. And for them, if they weren't as interested in acting and character development, like writing, it really was a question. Like, well, they didn't really want to do hero stuff actually at the end of the day. And doing just murder hoboing with no point does kind of get old, if not fast, then eventually it gets old. For different people, different thresholds. Again, play what you want to play. But I definitely think there's a lot of games now that are at least saying, look, it's not as open-ended because people might like a little direction to kind of, that bottleneck to just start. Like you said, like you're in a tavern. Okay, why are you in the tavern together? And some of the classics, if you think of Lord of the Rings or something, it's like little dudes smoking weed who don't want to do any heroic stuff, who have to do something to save the whole world. So it's a little more directive, right? In that sense, everything they're doing is like from the very beginning to save the planet. Now we might say that's like almost histrionic. It's like melodramatic by like modern, design standards, but
absolutely.
But I think there's something to that idea of like directing the players from the beginning lightly. They can still go whatever, they still have agency. And then also considering that heroism is not probably what most people actually want to perform. They want that to emerge organically, and just telling them they're a hero, they're a paladin and they always do right is like really kind of silly. And I think most kids probably today are like, yeah, that's kind of corny. So I think there's more games kind of playing around with, and and exploring dark stuff. I mean, Cartel again is another example. Like I know, didn't have not worked on that game. I just think it's really fun and really cool. Like you can really take it either way. Like it can be something where it's almost too much like law enforcement is good or law enforcement is bad and being a narco-trafficante is good. But I think a well-played game would just explore like these are real people who have interesting situations that can be dramatic in a very fun way to sort of inhabit, just like if you imagined a knight fighting a goblin could be a fun dramatic situation to save the town or whatever. But, you know, again, just freshing it up, coming in with new situations. And I think some of those questions, just to me, it seemed very obvious that other people weren't exploring kind of biopunk, the sort of mix of technology and time that I feel like was really, maybe because of the anthropology of technology, like it was very apparent to me that would be interesting. Like, okay, you found a bunch of alien stuff. It's very advanced. You don't know how it works. So what are you going to do with it? It is kind of like magic items, but having the ability to talk in the idiom of like hard SF to players has been so fun. They ask the wildest questions. We'll get in these they're like, how big is, like, what's the circumference of this planet? Or like, oh, the gun that when you shoot it at people, it splits them into different multiple copies. It's like completely ridiculous science fantasy, but we'll get into like the physics of like, okay, so there's some quantum entangles, and then it's like, how do you divide by self or something like, and it becomes these little philosophical moments that are super fun. And again, you could play it as in as goofy a register as you want. You can also have very epic, like we're gonna like, and so that's part of it, like perform your fun political journey with your friends, but in a low-key way, where at the end of the day, also you're just gonna go home and not be playing games anymore. It's not organizing. It's not going to lead to anything immediately. It might help in the background, just be part of your life and have you more able to express, and with friends, like ask questions, and kind of like shit test, like kick the tires on different political positions. How radical are you? These are ways that we can express ourselves through games. So again, I think maybe your game will get at some of these issues about death and dying. I mean, I can imagine, all games can get there in terms of depth, but just to speak for Stillfleet, those were things when I decided to make it a real game and publish it. It was after many years of these different pieces coming together and feeling like, oh, I can finally articulate them. It's not what I set out to do, but like when I realized I could say these things, I was like, all right, screw it. Let me try to like put it out and see what people say.
I think you're right. The what do I want to say? Political consciousness, right, is it's something that develops slowly over time. It's not, I think that for some people there might be like big epiphany moments, like, I don't know, read the Communist Manifesto for the first time or something, and you're like, oh yeah, we should own the rights of production. Like, of course, like those can be epiphany moments, but for the most part, it is, like you said, kicking the tires. It's figuring things out, and essentially, it is a form of play where you're trying to figure out where you do land, how you do actually feel about things. And so I think, gaming can be a really powerful gateway into that. And it's nice to think about entering that in a more intentional way, where it's like, this is, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like video games from like the 90s or 2000s that kind of play around with that. There's like Red Planet or something like that. It's like you're a Martian revolutionary, stuff like that. But it's like, that always feels very secondary.
Right. Because you're still ultimately going on tactical shooting missions in a lot of those games. Fallout has a lot of that stuff built in too.
Yeah.
And it's a survival game with politics, which is halfway there. But the narrative structure, I haven't played a lot of the newer ones really, but the earlier ones I was really into. And it's like, you didn't have to do anything too political. You could kind of just murder hobo in a world that was political, which was, again, was still mind blowing at the time, I thought.
But all that's to say that, I think that I think it's interesting. I think it's also important that we have games that allow for those structures to at least be in place, that allow people to explore it. And, like you said earlier, I think one of the beautiful things about tabletop role-playing games is that it is open-ended. You can do what you as a player want to do in the game.
Right.
And whether that's, you personally, or you're really inhabiting your character, like really role-playing, whatever. So, people will do whatever they desire in the game world, but having the structure in place to play politically and to meditate, ruminate on those ideas is really important.
Yeah, and I think something that we've thought about as a group, as the game has moved from a hobby, book that I wrote for my friends, to a product for a small business that we're trying to make work in terms of just being able to make more games, at least, like at minimum.
Yeah.
And luckily we've been, we're really appreciative. Like a lot of people have been really supportive. And so it's not like we haven't taken out some crazy loan or something. We're doing fine in the sense that we haven't like lost money while producing physical books, which are really high quality. And we took a lot of time on and made a lot of art for and all that stuff. So
I mean, I will say this is
Oh, thank
one
you.
of the
Got the book.
this is one of the nicest. But I mean, this is so it's so great.
Well, we really opted. I convinced everyone to do this like the big book approach, which in retrospect, I'm like, oh my god, it's so expensive. The upside is like it does feel nice. The paper's really nice. It's just it's a beautiful book, and that has only minimal. I mean, in terms of the design, right? It's only minimally to do with me because I mostly was writing it. So you know, I have to shout out my friends who joined me on this epic adventure there. But I was going to say some of the ideas of like politics and games for us as a company is exactly about exploring those boundaries too, and not reproducing Stillfleet. So while I love Stillfleet and we're going to keep making content for it, we're also coming up with new ideas and trying to figure out, okay, what's next in terms of other ways to kind of do leftism in a fun way in game universes that isn't like, you know, Stillfleet is a little more like Spire in it's kind of a kill your master's game, right? Like ultimately you don't have to, and the system is much stronger than you. It's not all the way to cyberpunk dystopia in that sense, but it's maybe further that direction from a fantasy game. But you know, yeah, you can kind of fight back because you do have some heroic epic powers. So you know, how do we design games that are lower power? How do we design games that are more appealing for kids? How do we design games with fantasy tropes and still think about sort of class relations, the role of like, you know, speculative like races in games? Like that's something that's a real live wire that Stillfleet kind of avoids by being just so silly. It's so far in the future. So the made up aliens are just made up. They don't correspond to anything in 2023. Anyway, those are questions that are like, I don't presume to have all the answers to, or think that we as a company will come up with like all the answers, but I like to think that we're really, we have a practice that's so fun. Like I want it to work in part just because it's been mind blowing to have like really a labor of love that requires so many hours, also have like a deep meaning behind it, and also kind of work with a community. So I think that's another reason TTRPGs to me are different than other forms of art, because you have to play test, you have to get feedback. I think, I mean, I guess people publish without doing that, but at their peril, I would say. So
yeah, I can only think of a handful of one-page RPGs that I know have not been play tested. Like I think Fucked Up Little Guy, I think Grant Howitt wrote that.
I think that's Grant Howitt, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just like, I think he played Elden Ring or something and was like, oh, this is funny, I'll just put it out there. And it like blew up overnight. And he was like, oh, I guess I should have play tested this before I put it out there, but whatever.
Like, yeah, but he's done so many of those one-page games, which play around with the same like 2d6 or 3d6 mechanics. Some have totally unique mechanics, but I think he's kind of earned it.
Yeah, he definitely has. And Fucked Up Little Guy is more, you know, it's a vehicle for storytelling more than it is, I would say, like a hard, like, you know, role-playing game. It's more of just like get around the table with your friends and tell some goofy stories and you know, throw a die every now and then.
I think most of those one-off, like to me, they're always fun for one game only, because it's hard to imagine the arcs of character development going longer than a couple hours.
Yeah.
But they can be super fun, like Honey Heist and the Untitled Goose Game RPG was very fun. I played one of those as a goose, not as a GM, and I think the rolling, it was very unclear kind of when you rolled which die, but it also like really didn't matter. I was just like, I'm a goose who likes to smoke cigarettes and vape. That was like the thing I decided my goose got into, and I was just really aggressive toward humans. So again, very like that's just kind of murder hoboing, but it became weirdly about, you know, the politics of like non-human interactions in a small town.
Goose human relations.
Yeah. So anything if you put your philosophy head on can be like a little bit deeper, but yeah, mostly games are silly, and that's again, Stillfleet is mostly also a silly, like a good time.
Okay, it's good. It's good to be silly, like they should be.
And it's good to be silly with dark things, which again, I'm excited to turn to plug Danse Macabre, which we'll talk about, you know, give it its own episode. But I think that's one reason people have really been drawn to Merc Borg and back to like the BX, like the early Dragon Game editions, where the lethality is very high, or like DCC. There's like a lot of versions of this. The lethality is high. Everything is just a murderous monster that wants to kill you, and it's sort of like living in a metal video. But there's something cathartic about that, and I think there's something cathartic about pretending to be a goose and all the humans are just annoyed at you. There's something cathartic about, you know, being the bad guy. There's something cathartic about refusing to, you know, being Bartleby, right? Like not doing your job well in Stillfleet, or Inspire, being suspicious of obviously your oppressors, but also like the ministers are probably sending you on a suicide quest. You know, it's like there's something about leaning into the darkness that games can create a really nice, safe space to do as a friend group. So it's not as solo as video games, and it's not as tracked like linear as video games. And I think, I imagine you have thoughts on that, I guess. So that's really a question for you, but
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think calling it a metal video is a good way to think about it. Like, I don't know. I think about camp a lot, or campiness, not camp in the British sense, but like, camp horror, things like that, where like, I don't know, you think about like Friday the 13th or any of that kind of stuff in that genre, where it's just like, yes, it is dark and it is ultra violent, but just to a point of absurdity, and I think that when you reach that point, it does allow for a lot of freedom, and a lot of just like, you can kind of do whatever you want. And we'll talk more about Danse Macabre, but that is something that I kind of wanted to explore with that game, where again, lethality rate is really high. There are mechanics that allow the character to continue going afterwards, but it's like, where do you take a character who you start as a villain, as a peasant in French medieval society. You're nobody, and then you're kind of chosen or stumble across this kind of epic role that you're placed in, but you're still just, you're illiterate, you're for better or worse, just kind of like completely uneducated, and you're just kind of thrust into this world of like really horrible monsters and gore and repeated trauma of dying terribly over and over again. And so it's like, what do you do with a character like that? I think that there's a lot of possibilities, and I do think that that's why games like Morkborg and DCC and a lot of the BX stuff is really popular, is because it's like, well, if I'm gonna die, like, if you go into it knowing that, what does that allow you to open up in terms of role play? If you know that it's a dire situation, if you know that things aren't going to go well, maybe that's an entertaining space to enter.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the freedom of the absurd that people experience with modernity. So as the fin de siècle led to the First World War, you had the birth of all these kind of modernist genres of literature and art and cinema that were kind of trying to grapple with the meaninglessness, the horror of mechanized death, and industrialized scale death. And I always think of the famous Sam Beckett phrase, I can't go on, I'll go on. It's like just what you're saying with your game, you literally die and come back.
Yeah. You don't have a choice.
You don't have a choice. You must go on. I think a lot of that informs the political turn in games and the metal turn, as well as there is an impulse toward religiosity and just playing with some of those forms. I don't think it's that everyone is suddenly sincerely like an early Christian, but I think going back to like metal, sort of satanic panic stuff, is partially about just quickly tapping into kind of cutting through a lot of bullshit in culture and just being like, whatever. Like I'm thinking of what's his name, Gabriel Kvaroga's Hell Knight, which is, it's like you're a demon on Earth to do bad stuff, but actually, it's like you're punishing bad guys. So it's meant to like have a narrative structure where, you can get away with being kind of evil, but you're actually like kind of heroic. And I think similarly with political games, I'd like to think Stillfleet, like we just ran a live stream with like political assassination, which is not like necessarily a fun sounding topic, but it was both very darkly funny and also really made people think about like their values. Like, well, do we want society to take this kind of a turn, which might, it's like on balance, how do you judge these things? And how do you practically do revolution? So you could have a game focus in a sort of meditative way on like your own individual consciousness and death and dying. You can have it kind of further back in the cycle of someone's life and focus on your ability as an adult with some agency in the world, whether a worker, sort of a serf, a villain on the farm, or an elite mercenary, basically classic murder hobo type. Your agency to do something, to change anything. And what do you choose to do? Do you just make money, get loot, live well? Do you just do random stuff? Do you try to be heroic? Do you try to overthrow society? And I think, just having games be a little more aware of themselves and what they're sort of asking players to do, and not to totally knock. I think some of the early ones the writers probably were asking some of these same questions. It just occurs to me that it's been like the same sort of style of gameplay. And even through to today, there's still so many games that are just recreating like 1975 Dragon stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much more interesting, just like what ifs to explore. So I'm really excited for this pod, in part because I think we're going to get people on. I think hopefully we'll even have some debates. Maybe some people will, have different ideas about sort of the right way to do it. But I think hopefully we'll have kind of that car talk, like ecumenical approach where we're offering different perspectives that are kind of useful, and hopefully if people like playing games but also designing them, that's my hope, is that these would actually be useful thoughts for people to be like, okay, where does my game fit, in these various imagined low-key, low stakes, but like imagine, matrices, right? Like, is my game more about this or more about that? So I think that is a kind of an interesting thing that you and I kind of naturally seem to do, is kind of ask those questions. Okay, is my game doing this or doing that other thing? So hopefully that's interesting to other folks.
Thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on Twitch and what used to be Twitter at Why We Roll, and on Instagram at whyweroll.pod.
You can find out more about Danse Macabre at timespaceplace.itch.io/dance-macabre.
You can find out more about Stillfleet at stillfleet.com. Thanks for listening.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.